Morning. It's Monday, August 3rd. So today's rant doesn't involve politics. It doesn't involve the coronavirus. It doesn't involve Trump. Doesn't involve the stimulus package. I'll call it a sort of historical rant. And there's a hurricane out there coming. Hurricane's name, it looked to me like it's Isaiah or something, but it's really Isaias, if you get that. So I figured I'd look up a little bit about naming hurricanes. So if you ever wondered how a hurricane got its name, it's really relatively simple. But the history behind it is kind of interesting. Hurricane itself comes from the Taino indigenous Caribbean world. And the word there was huracan, Hurakan, meaning evil spirits in the wind. It was the people of Cuba and Puerto Rico and Hispaniola and other countries in that region were the first to name these storms. And they were terrified of them. Anyhow, in the early days being before the 1900s, hurricanes were commonly named for the saint's day on which they occurred. And that kept on until around World War II. During World War II, the Navy and the Air Force and their meteorologists began naming tropical storms after girlfriends and wives as an easy method to keep track of multiple storms. So it was kind of, at that point, it was sexist. Then in 1953, the names, originally for women only, were officially used by the U.S. Weather Bureau. So that naming structure can be directly attributed to what the Air Force and the Navy was doing during World War II and the previous decades. So what happened is after World War II, meteorology became a staple on radio stations and on TV. And the practice of naming these hurricanes became more important because then people could remember the name of a particular storm. It wasn't like you say, you remember that rainstorm in 1948, blah, blah, blah. Now you could say, do you remember Sarah? Or do you remember Anna? Or do you remember Denise? Because those might have been terrible storms. So with the fact that we now have a meteorologist on every single news station and on every radio station, we can attribute that back to the fact that we were naming storms and that people had something concrete to talk about. It's very difficult to talk about a nebulous storm. Well, that was a big one. Remember 1941, that was a big one. Well, now we give them a name, and that name sticks in your mind. Well, you all remember Sandy. Well, in 1979, the names of men were introduced to the list for Atlantic storms in alphabetical order, excluding names starting with the letters Q, U, X, Y, or Z. The list now alternates gendered names. So it would be Anna, followed by Barry, followed by Clarice, followed by Dave, etc. You got the idea. So if you were paying attention, you'll notice that I left out 5 letters. That means that we only have 21 names in a season. It would seem to be that way. But if we have more than 21 storms in a season, then we switch to the Greek alphabet. And the last time the Greek alphabet was used was in the 2005 hurricane season. Now, if you've noticed the names that have been used in the hurricane seasons, most of those names are like French or Spanish or English, and that's because they represent the languages most commonly used across the Atlantic basin. Names are now chosen by the World Meteorological Organization and separate naming systems are used for different ocean regions. Similar to Atlantic names, names in other basins reflect the languages spoken in that particular region. So some interesting things have evolved over the course of the namings. In the western North Pacific Basin and the northern Indian Ocean Basin, countries in the region contribute one name each per season, which are used alphabetically. So imagine if we did that in the U.S., where Mexico would have a name, and the United States would have a name, and Canada would have a name, and Cuba would give us a name, and Jamaica would give us a name. We'd have plenty of different names. It might be more interesting than males and females. Something else is unique. In the Atlantic system, there are 6 lists of names, with each list being used in rotation once every 6 years. Now, if a storm is devastating, really devastating, it gets removed from the list. I guess that's because they never want to confuse it with a version of the same name that was relatively calm. They want those devastating storms to stick out in your memory. So think about that for a second, because none of us has ever seen the name Isaias before, because that name has replaced Ike, which was retired in 2008. And I don't know of any other storm that was retired off the top of my head. It wasn't listed in the article I was reading. In any event, I thought that was an interesting piece of information. I'm happy to pass it along, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you tomorrow.